Fox News. Breaking news.
Okay, stop what you're doing, because this is the kind of story the corporate media will try to smother. A U.S. government plane just landed in Havana for the first time since 2016. Secretary of State Marco Rubio quietly sent senior American officials straight in the heart of communist Cuba. They didn't arrive with pleasantries. They arrived with demands. Open the internet, release political prisoners, start real change. Then, hours later, Cuba's regime signaled it's willing to negotiate directly with President Trump's administration. Think about that. After decades of defiance, Havana blinked. So what exactly did Trump and Rubio do to force this moment? I'm going to tell you why this matters, because Cuba is not just another island story. It sits 90 miles from Florida, right off our shoreline, in a region where weakness from Washington used to invite chaos, trafficking, foreign influence, and threats to U.S. security. Under President Trump, that era is over. America is no longer sending apologies to dictators. We're sending terms. And for Cuban Americans whose families were jailed, brutalized, or forced to flee communist terror, this is deeply personal. They know exactly what regime cruelty looks like because they lived it. Now the world's seeing the results: blackouts, rationing, censorship, crumbling streets, and political prisoners. Rubio said those blackouts are not America's fault. They're the product of a failed regime still running equipment from the 1950s because the communists never maintained or upgraded it. You see, that's what socialism builds: misery, decay, and fear. Now, politically, it's a test of the American strength. If Trump can force Havana to the table, every anti-American regime on the planet is taking notes. And when we're talking about pressure campaigns and who folds, let's talk about your money. See, Noble Gold Investments has a message every American investor needs to hear right now. See, Wall Street doesn't lose money on sell-offs. You do. They create the panic, wait for you to dump your position out of fear, and scoop it up at a discount. The big banks aren't selling their gold, they're buying yours. Every time the headlines scream, regular people sell, and every time regular people sell, the institutions are right there waiting with open hands. You built portfolio insurance for a reason. Don't let a red day hand it over to the people who caused it. That's why I tell people to check out Noble Gold Investments at nextnewsgold.com. And right now, you can receive a free 10th ounce American Gold Eagle when you qualify. That's nextnewsgold.com. Make sure you visit before the next panic hits, or call that number 877-646-5347. Tell them Gary sent you. Now back to the showdown in Cuba, because the timeline here is where it gets even bigger. Now, this is the part that should make every viewer sit up straight. This did not come out of nowhere. Reports say there was a 2-week deadline discussed in a secret Cuba meeting. The Wall Street Journal then reported that the grandson of Raul Castro tapped a wealthy Havana entrepreneur to try to personally deliver a letter to the White House. In plain English, the regime was hunting for a channel to Trump. Why? Because they knew the pressure was real. The system was failing, and Rubio was not interested in cosmetic reforms. This is the breaking news. Rubio just sent a U.S. delegation to Havana, the first since 2016. They sat down with Castro's grandson and dropped demands. Rubio's been waiting for his shot, and now he's getting it.
Department confirms Secretary Marco Rubio dispatched a delegation of senior officials to negotiate in Havana. Last week, a U.S. government plane landed on the island nation's soil for the first time since 2016. As the U.S. fuel blockade worsens an already dire humanitarian crisis for Cuba's people, U.S. officials believe there is an opening to push communist leaders out. Quote, President Trump is committed to pursuing a diplomatic solution if possible, but will not let the island collapse into a major national security threat if Cuba's leaders are unwilling or unable to act. President Trump is reportedly considering a range of options, from U.S. military intervention to U.S.-led regime change.
You hear that Cuba is next.
Even Cuba's president, wary of U.S. threats, says at this point diplomacy and dialogue with the Trump administration would be, quote, difficult, given the changing nature of American foreign policy.
Cuba has always stood by its commitments, and the United States have not fulfilled its part of the deal.
President Obama ushered in the Cuban thaw of 2016, opening up Americans' access via travel and investment. But subsequent administrations restricted that access, much to the apparent dismay of Obama's inner circle.
Biden was a chicken and was afraid to go back to the Obama policy.
A senior official confirms to us tonight that that delegation met with Fidel Castro's grandson, who is 94 years old, while on the ground in Havana. They also tell us the delegation made demands of Havana, including major reforms like opening up the internet and making sure going forward that they agree to release at least some political prisoners, Brett.
We'll follow it. Jillian Turner, live at the State Department. Jillian.
Big news. Rubio's team putting Havana on notice with demands. Now Byron Donalds weighs in. Cuba is next. Marco Rubio working behind the scenes.
Ask you, Congressman, would you in fact support military action in Cuba if that were the way to lead to regime change?
I'm not going to stand and step in front of what the president and any decisions that he or Secretary Rubio are going to make on this front. But I think it's important for everybody to listen to his words. He would rather continue to suppress the people of Cuba to the point where they have to ration food, to the point where political opposition is jailed, where there is no free press, no ability to communicate. And he believes that that's worth dying for. I think that says all that needs to be said.
That's all that needs to be said. Making the moral case plain, the regime would rather jail dissent and ration food than give up control. Now we have this. Secretary of State Rubio, longtime proponent of regime change in Havana, said Cuba's announced reforms are not sufficient, demanding instead wholesale political and economic transformation on the island. Is the United States preparing to attack Cuba? That's the headline. So the pressure point is clear, not token concessions, but wholesale change. Trump saying a turning point. Very soon, the great strength of the American military will create a new dawn for Cuba.
And very soon, this great strength will also bring about a day, 70 years in waiting. It's called a new dawn for Cuba. We're going to help them out with Cuba. We have a lot of great Cuban Americans. Not too many people in this audience, I don't think, but you go to Miami, we have people, Cuban Americans, people that were brutally treated, whose families were killed and brutalized. And now, watch what happens. Under this.
The new dawn for Cuba on the horizon, raising the stakes. And the memes are writing themselves. Venezuela was first, Iran second, and Cuba is next. And then we take a look. These are the streets of Cuba. This is what it looks like in Cuba.
Así lucen las calles de La Habana en 2025. Caminar.
I mean, look at the destruction. Look at the degraded infrastructure. This is what communism, this is what socialism brings. That's just a taste. Rubio says Cuba's blackouts aren't about outside pressure. It's decades of neglect and outdated infrastructure like you just saw.
Blackouts that are occurring that I see people reporting have nothing to do with us. They were having blackouts last year. They're having blackouts because they have equipment from the 1950s in their grid that they've never maintained and never upgraded because they're incompetent. That's why they're having blackouts.
Incompetence. Well, President Trump certainly could fix that. And of course, we come back to some more memes. Someone made this parody, "Don't Stop Believin'," with Trump and Vance and Hegseth, Rubio liberating Cuba. I'll play a little bit of it.
Just a Queensborn guy living in a lonely world.
You guys get the point, right? Certainly capturing the mood on the right. Strength, pressure, no more coddling dictators. And now we have this. This was actually, this took place when I was in D.C. I just missed this gaggle. I was so disappointed I missed this gaggle. Peter Doocy getting a chance to speak to President Trump and Marco Rubio as Trump was departing the White House.
President Trump said this week that he can take Cuba. How soon can that happen?
Well, I mean, Cuba's a disaster, and it's because of their communist government. It doesn't work. So I don't have any news for you on that today, other than that's been going on for 67 years. They're a disaster. It's the worst it's ever been.
And what do you guys...
The worst it's ever been. Cuba's a disaster because communism doesn't work. Wall Street Journal reporting the grandson of Cuban leader Raul Castro tapped a wealthy Havana entrepreneur, tried to personally deliver a letter to the White House last week. They are reaching out, trying to back-channel contact with Washington. President Trump imposing a 2-week deadline during a secret Cuba meeting, apparently.
We may stop by Cuba after we're finished with this, but Cuba is a nation that was just been horribly run for many years by Castro.
2-week deadline. Havana's not just talking, it's under pressure and on the clock. And we have this, Cuba signaling its willingness to negotiate with the U.S. after mounting pressure. Miguel Diaz-Canel confirms direct talks underway. After years of defiance, Havana is now at the table. Trump's pressure campaign appears to be forcing a shift the world did not expect.
Aligned with the consistent policy that the Cuban Revolution has always, without fail, presented under the leadership of the Army General, the historic leader of our revolution and my own, and in coordination with the principal authorities of the party, the government, and the Cuban state, Cuban officials have, in fact, recently held conversations with representatives of the government of the United States in order to seek, through the process of dialogue, a possible solution to the bilateral differences that exist between our two nations. These exchanges have been fostered by international actors, and here I want to pause. Whenever we have been in tense situations regarding relations with the United States, efforts emerge to seek out channels of dialogue, to seek out conversations. This is not the first time that Cuba has entered into a conversation of this kind. I believe that the most recent example was the way in which the Army General led the conversations with President Obama in a very recent period, and we all know the results that came from those conversations. Well, now, it is also the case that a certain group of international actors have indeed supported the development of all of these exchanges. What exactly are the purposes that we are pursuing with these conversations, and what are the specific objectives we have set for ourselves? Well, first of all, we must clearly determine which are indeed the bilateral problems that are in need of a solution.
President Trump knows exactly how to find solutions or force solutions. So this is the moment. See, Cuba didn't just suddenly discover diplomacy out of goodwill. It came to the table because President Trump restored American leverage and Secretary Rubio used it. Trump publicly promised a new dawn for Cuba driven by American strength. Rubio made clear that blackouts and collapse were the regime's own fault. Byron Donalds spelled out the moral truth. This government would rather jail opponents, crush free speech, ration food, and silence its people than give up control. And then came the breakthrough. The U.S. plane in Havana, direct talks confirmed and demands delivered face to face. See, that's what strength looks like. The establishment hates this because it proves dictators respond to pressure, not lectures. You see, America First doesn't manage decline, it changes the equation. Now, the big takeaway is very simple. Communist Cuba is cracking, and it's cracking because the Trump administration brought back something Washington had nearly forgotten. It's called resolve. No more pampering tyrants, no more pretending failed socialism just needs another conference and another excuse. The images out of Havana tell the story. Broken streets, decaying buildings, blackouts, rationing, fear. That is the end result of 65 years of communist control. And now President Trump and Secretary Rubio have Havana talking on America's terms. And that's a win for freedom, a win for Cuban Americans, and a win for the United States. If you believe Cuba should free political prisoners and open itself to real liberty, share this report right now. And then comment below with the yes or no. Should President Trump keep the pressure on the Cuban regime until the people are truly free? Make sure you subscribe, tap the bell, and check out the Next News merch shelf below this video and text RAW FEED to 844-840-4963 so the algorithm can't bury this truth. America's back, and the dictators know it.
The system controls information. Information control is power. They don't want you to see this. The truth only survives together. They don't want this shared. Share this now.